Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, rock stars, to a wonderful new video. Super important video, by the way. This is going to be one of those that you really want to feel like you're mastering what is being taught here, because it is going to be one of those things that makes life a little easier for you as you move forward. It's just a really important topic, guys. And what we're talking about today is the equivalencies between fractions, decimals, and percents. I've got several videos on decimal understanding and fraction understanding and a video on percents that help, but this is the one that ties them all together. But what we're trying to do is figure out for you guys, how can we use decimal, percents, and fractions, and how do we see them as the same thing just in different formats, and then how do we move in between them? So dig in, pay attention, take notes, do all the things you need to do. And if it helps, like, think about the internet. Like, you got to get online, just like trees do. You know, how do trees get online? You know, they simply log on. They log on. It's a log. See, when you cut a tree down, and it turns into okay. All right. So the target today is I will be able to represent and determine equivalencies among decimals, percents, and fractions. Okay. We're also going to talk about proper and improper fractions, and even use mixed numbers. But really, can I move in between decimals, percents, and fractions? Okay. Again, just dial in, y'all. Dial in. This is huge. Okay. So let's start off by discussing. Let's think about, what do fractions, decimals, and percents all have in common? And for this part of the conversation, please understand, when I'm talking about fractions, I am talking about proper fractions. What do they all have in common? Okay. What they all have in common is simply that every time you hear a percent, as long as it's a percent between 0% and 100%, okay? And then we talk about fractions. I just mentioned that. Anytime you have a fraction that is a proper fraction. And then a decimal that has a 0 at the beginning, a decimal, and then any numbers you want. You can put 1,000, 7, 4, 3, 9, 1, 6, 52, or just keep going. As long as it's one of those numbers, and it only has a 0 at the beginning. So regular percents, just decimals, and fractions, what they have in common is that every one of them's value is somewhere between 0 and 1. And of course, we can go the other direction. If there was a negative number, it would be between 0 and -1. But for this video, we're simply talking about, as they navigate themselves, what we're talking about is they are all between 0 and 1. So when you see 76%, it's still less than 1. When you see 3/8, it's less than 1. When you see 0.999999999999999999999, it's still less than 1. It's between 0 and 1. Okay, so it's real important that we understand that. So a fraction is what we're trying to get to, is part of a whole. Okay, and so it's between 0 and 1. So what do fractions, decimal, percents have in common? A fraction is part of a whole. So look at this circle. This is a piece of pizza. Okay, a fraction is part of a whole. So if that's a pizza, a whole pizza, and we ate that one slice right there that you're looking at, right there, it's part of a whole. Okay? If we look at it in this sense, so we got this little xylophone thing, and we say which portion of it is red. Well, the red is one piece out of 4, and the whole is one little xylophone bell set, if you want to call it that. And then we look at it in a number line. Okay, a number line looks like, again, it's going from 0 to 1, and this one, it's doing 1/4 of the number line, or 1/4 of a whole. So it's part of a whole. Yeah, I think you're starting to see a pattern. And if we look at, we have 4 balls in this bag, and we say, what portion of it is basketballs? We would say there's 1 out of 4. So a fraction is always part of a whole. Everybody with me so far? It's still between 0 and 1, right? Okay, even though there's 4 balls here, what we're talking about is the group of balls, and it's one group, and 1/4 of them is basketballs, okay? So let's look at this scenario here. So a percent is part of a whole, okay? Let's take a look and see what that looks like, all right? So we got this pizza, and we ate 1 out of 4 pieces. Guess what percent that is? 25% of the whole pizza. And we can do the same thing with a bar graph. We had one of those, what percentage of them is red? Why do I keep saying bar graph? It's bills, okay? What percentage of that? Well, it's 1 out of 4, which is also 25%. And then we got a number line that goes through, and the green portion that's highlighted there, that's 25% of the whole, 25% of the number line. It's 1/4. See how they're all working together? Isn't this just purty? Oh my gosh, it's the same picture. 1 basketball out of 4. So what percentage of the basketballs do I have? What percentage of the balls that I have are basketballs? And it is 25%. This is just amazing. Wait a second. There's more. Yeah, now we're going to talk about decimals. Decimals are also part of a whole, okay? As long as there's a 0 at the beginning of it, it's part of a whole. So we're going to look at some very unique pictures. These are the same pictures, but they make sense because now we have a pizza. What decimal, if we're going to look at it that way, of the pizza did we eat? 1/4, which is also 0.25. And the bar graph, 1/4, which is also 0.25. So when we say 1/4, I must have forgot to put the 0.25 in, but I'm going to fix it right now as we're going. So this would be 0.25, and this would be 0.25, okay? And we look at this, what part of the whole is that? It's 0.25. Here comes this fourth to get in our way. And then I look at the basketball, and it is 1/4, which is also 0.25, okay? All of those are part of a whole. So the whole point of doing that whole thing right there was to show you that every one of those pictures, for example, the pizza, has 3 ways of showing a value. We could look at it as a fraction and we could say it's 1/4 of the pizza. We can look at it a percent and it's 25% of the pizza. We can look at it a decimal and we can say it's 0.25 or 25 hundredths of the pizza. And did we eat any more or less of the pizza in any of those scenarios? No, we did not. It's the same thing. They all represent the same value. So what does that tell us? Fractions, decimal, and percents all show the same values. So if we know that, we can convert between them. And that's what the most important part of this lesson is trying to figure out how do we convert between them. Okay? So if you've watched my fraction understanding video, you've seen this before. You've seen that there is I build a line, a number line with fractions. So if I have a fraction that is 0 out of 4, which means something's cut into 4 pieces, or there's, let's say you have a class with 4 people in it, and I say how many of them love math videos. The scenario would never be 0 of them because, of course, it's going to be all of them. But in this case, let's just say 0 of them do. So 0 out of 4. And if 1 of them raise their hand, it'll be 1 out of 4. And if 2 of them raise their hand, it'll be 2 out of 4. And if 3 of them raise their hand, it would be 3 out of 4. And since 4 of them would absolutely raise their hand, it's 4 out of 4. So that's a whole. So it's just one whole. But look at how percents match up exactly the same way. Same situation. The kids ask them to raise their hand. None of them raise their hand. Well, 0% of the kids raise their hand. 1 kid raises his hand. It's 25%. 2 kids raise their hand. 2 out of 4, that is. We'll make sure we're still talking about the 4 kids in the group. It's 50%. 3/4 is equivalent to 75%. And if all the kids raise their hand, that's 100%. And then we look at decimals, same thing. 0 kids raise their hand, well, that's just 0.0. If 1 out of 4 kids raise their hand, it's 0.25. And then if 2 out of the 4, it's 0.5. If 3 out of the 4 raise their hand, it's 0.7. And I think you're seeing it. But these are like the benchmarks that we use a lot. So these are kind of easy, but we're going to get into a situation where it becomes a little harder. Okay, so first off, let's talk about turning fractions. So we turn fractions into percents and decimals. So if you haven't seen my video on percents, this is going to seem new to you. But if you have, hopefully this is just a quick review. So how do we turn a fraction into a percent and or decimal? Okay, so we look at this and we say, let's look at this fraction. And all we ever do is say, method 1, just get to 100. Say it again. Get to 100. What'd you say? Get to 100. All right, so what we do is we set these equal to 100. I'm going to do both of them at the same time and say, let's set them equal to 100. And what we mean by that is, if we can get a fraction to have 100 on the bottom, then the number on the top, the numerator, is the percent, okay? Because percent means something out of 100, something per 100, okay? And then once we get to that point, all we have to do is say to ourselves, what did we do from this 50 to get to the 100? Because we're trying to find equivalent fractions. Well, I multiplied by 2. And if I multiply the bottom by 2 and I want an equivalent fraction, I have to multiply the top by 2. What's 2 times 2? That is 4. Okay, let me do the same with the bottom real quick. So we just have our 2 fractions that are out of 100. What did I do to get from my 4 to 100? Well, you can play around with numbers and say 4 times 10, that's too small. 4 times 50, that's way too big. But eventually you'll get to the point where it's 4 groups of 25. 4 times 25 is 100. So now I have to multiply the top by 25. And 5 groups of 25 is, well, that's 125. Okay? And once we get to that part, so we did step 1, make the fractions equivalent to 100. So fractions to percents and decimals, just make it set to 100. And then when you do, now you already know the percent, okay? Because the top number will be the percent. So this one is also equal to 4%, because 4 is the top number. And this one is equal to 125%, because 125% is the top number. And then the next one, so that's how we do to turn it into percents. And the next one is how do we turn it into a decimal? Well, that's when you got to understand place value. Okay, so if you haven't watched the place value video, take a look at it. But the way this works is we look at, go back to the fraction that we made it out of 100, and we say, just say this word as it's supposed to be said. Don't say 4 over 100 or say 4 per 100. Say it in its real word format. So it's 4 100ths. 4 100ths. I'm going to go over here real quick and say this is our place value. This first one is tenths. Tenths. And this next one is hundredths. Urdths. So we have, that's some horrible handwriting. I get it. It's really hard to write with this Apple Pencil. So I said 400ths. So place the 4 in the hundredths place. Okay? Okay. And then what you have is, if there's a 4 there, you're going to go ahead and put a 0 here because there's no tenths in your statement. Okay? So this would be 0.04. This, and this are all the same thing. But now we know how to say them in fractions, we know how to say them in percents, and we know how to say them in decimals. This next one's a little harder, but since it's out of 100, all you got to do is put your 0 here. The first number you see will be the tenths place. And if you don't have a number there, like this one, because it only was 1, you're going to go the 1, and then it's 2, and then it's 5. Okay? And that's how you turn a improper fraction, and it's the same thing. Set it used to 100, but when you turn it into percent, it's going to be bigger than 100. So that one is more than 1 because it's not a proper fraction. Okay, so that one, review, fractions to percents and decimals. What's the first thing we do? Set it to 100. Set your fraction to 100. See this over here? Get it to 100. And if you can do that, then the top number is the percent. And then after that, say it out loud and put it in the place value chart. Okay? Let's try another one. Fractions, percents, and decimals. So now let's do another one. What happens if you can't get to 100? So if we look at these and say, well, I just don't think I can get that to 100. Well, one, if you can't get it to 100, the first thing you do is divide the fraction. So we're going to act like these two are impossible to get to 100. Okay? So, and anything will get to 100, it just turns out to be a decimal, whatever. But just imagine, thinking caps, we can't get there from here. So for example, like if you had 3/7, 7 is not going to go into 100 evenly, okay? So all you do, do you guys know that when you read a fraction and it's 3 over 8 or 3/8, this line in the middle is also a division sign? What? Yep, it's a division sign. So all you got to do is go back and say, all right, I got to say 3 divided by 8, okay? And if you were allowed to use a calculator for this problem, you would just do it on a calculator. And if you were walking down the street or wherever you are in the real world, you would pull up your wonderful smartphone and do the same thing. But right now, for this instance, we're just going to do it the traditional algorithm way and say, will 8 go into 3? It will not. Okay, so then we're going to add a 0 here because 3.0 is the same thing as 3. And then we say, how many times will 8 go into 30? Okay, and so 8 goes into 30. We know our times tables. That's 8, 16, 24, 32. 32 is too big, so we got to go back to 3. So it goes into it 3 times, and we say, well, that's 24. Okay? Then we subtract, and we get a 6. We're not done. We got to add a 0 over here and bring it on down and do it again. How many times does 8 go into 64? Well, you go through your 8, 16. You get to the point where you say, that's 7, and that's 56. Oh, we're still not at 0, so we do it again. How many times will 8 go into 40? Well, that would be 5. 5 times 8 is 40, so we've got that figured out. So, again, we said divide the fraction. And when you do, the answer is your decimal. So this decimal is 0.375. And then whenever you're going to turn a decimal into a percent, you simply multiply it by 100. Okay, and I don't know if you guys remember this, but there is a little trick there. So if you could write this down and multiply by 100, and you're going to get the same answer as the trick I'm about to tell you. But in the place value chart, when you multiply or divide by a 10 base number, what is a 10 base number? Something with a 1 in the beginning and a 0 after, like 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 1 million. You see the ones in the front of all of them? However many places on the place value chart you're trying to move it, which 100 would be 2 places on the place value chart, just move the decimal 2 places on the place value chart. So I take this and I'm multiplying it by 100. So I take that and I go whoop, whoop. And now I have 37.5%. All right, so I still have my decimal is 0.375. All right, so 3/8 is the same thing as 0.375, and when I move the decimal to turn it into percent, I'm right here. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to erase the screen. So if you're writing this down, you want to pause it, go for it real quick. I'm going to erase the screen so I can have more room to do the next one, okay? So we look at this one and we say, all right, we got 5/4, or 5 divided by 4. So 5's on the inside, 4 goes on the outside, because when you write down a division problem, you start from the inside out. How many times will 5 or 4 go into 5? Well, it goes into it one time. And so we put that down here. One group of 4 is 4. We got 1. Well, we got something left over, so we're going to add a decimal, okay? How many times does 4 go into a 10? Remember, when you add a decimal, you got to put one up here too, right? So how many times does 4 go into a 10? It goes into it twice. All right, so that's 8. And we subtract it, and we got 2. Well, we got a number down there, so we're going to bring another 0 down because we're trying to get to a final answer. How many times will 4 go into 20? Well, it goes into it 5 times. And what's 5 times 4? It's 20. So when we subtract that, will be 0. So now we're good. So now we just found our decimal. Remember, we divided the fraction. We did that. And we got an answer, and that's our decimal. So this is equal to 1.25. That's our decimal. Oh, I'm sorry, not that one. This one is equal to 1.25. And what do we do when we want to get it turn it to a percent? We simply multiply it by 100. And what do we do when we multiply by 100? We move the decimal 2 spots to the right. Where's the decimal? It's after the 1. If I move it twice, it's going to end up after the 5. That's it. Okay? If you can get it to 100, it's a lot easier. But sometimes you're not going to be able to, so you have to do this division game, turn it into a decimal, and then simply, that'll be your decimal, obviously, and then simply move it over 2 places to the right. Now, what if we have a percent? So remember, we're trying to navigate our way through all these. What happens if we have a percent, and now we want to make it a fraction and a decimal? Well, to me, this is one of the easiest ones. Because percents to a decimal, remember how we got from a decimal to percent? We multiplied by 100. Well, when we're trying to get to a decimal, all we got to do is go the opposite direction. So if we multiplied 100 to get there, now we're going to divide by 100. Okay, so we take this number 37 and we divide by 100. You don't have to go write this big thing down and do all this division because we're dividing by a base 10 number, right? It's divided by 1 with a couple zeros. How many places on the place value chart is 100? It's going to be 2 spots, right? We're moving 10 times 10, so it's 2 spots. So if we're dividing by 100, we're going to move the decimal to the left. So we just simply say, if we move this to a decimal, we get rid of the percent sign, whoop, move the decimal, which is at the end. If you don't see a decimal, it's always at the end, and we move it 2 places to the left. So there's our decimal, okay? And then, if we do this to the other one, same thing. Where's the decimal? It's at the end. Let's turn it into a decimal. We get rid of it, move it 2 to the left, and we are at 2.14, okay? And then for a fraction, you simply put the percent over 100. Because that's what a percent is, right? It's a number out of 100, and then we just pull that number out and add a percent sign to it. So this one's real easy. Go back to your original number. It was 37%, okay? Take that number, 37, and just put it over 100. And then simplify if you can. So that's the simplify part. Is there something that will go into 37 and 100? No, 37 is one of those numbers that doesn't simplify, all right? Let's go to this next one, 214%. Again, do the same thing, 214 over 100, okay? Now this one can simplify, and it's real easy to tell that this one can simplify right off the bat because they're both even numbers. So at the very least, we know that both of those numbers can be divided by 2. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and work on that real quick. Let me get rid of some room up here. So I'm going to write this again up here so I can have some room to work. So 214 over 100, okay? Let's divide both of them by 2. Remember, we're trying to find equivalent fractions, so whatever we do to the top, we got to do the same thing to the bottom. So if you take 214 and cut it in half, that would be 107. And if you cut 100 in half, you cut it into 50. Well, I don't think we can get any smaller than that because I don't know any other numbers that will go into 107. So the only numbers that will go into 50 are 1, 2, because 1 times 50, 2 times 25, 5 times 10, and that's it. So I know 1 will go into everything. 2 won't go into that because it's not even. 5 won't go into that because it ends in a 7. Everything, when you multiply by 5, it will end in a 0 and a 5. 10 won't go into it because it has to end in a 0. 25 won't go into it because it's the same thing. It has to end in a 5 and a 0. 50 won't go into it because everything's going to be into 50. So that's our final answer. So if we simplify it, it's 107 over 50. Unless they told you to put it in a mixed number, then you would go that route. But again, from percent to fractions, it's 2 rules. Percent, multiply by 100, move the decimal divide by 100, move the decimal 2 places to the left. That's easy. Just got to remember that rule. And one of the ways that I always remembered that, and I tell kids all the time remember it, is if you want to go from a percent to a decimal, let's get rid of these 2 because they're scary, and let's run 2 away from them. It's kind of the rule. And then a fraction is just simply take that number that you had and put it over 100 and get rid of the percent. Okay, let's see what the next scenario is. All right, now we got decimals. We want to go from decimals, so they're given a decimal, so we got 0.73, and we want to take it and turn it into a fraction and a percent. So what are our rules? For a percent, just multiply the decimal by 100. Remember, we just went backwards by dividing by 100 to get rid of the percent sign. So now we want to hug that percent sign. So let's run to it and give it a hug. So let's go 2 to the right. All right, so our decimal just moved 2 to the right, and we give it a percent sign. When you're changing a decimal to a percent, just run 2 to the right, write the new number down, and put a percent there. Okay, that's how percents work. For a fraction, simply use the place value. How do you say this? 73 hundredths. 73 100ths. That's it. And this one's 5 and 29 hundredths. 5 wholes, 29, because the 9's in the hundreds place, 29 hundredths. That's it. Now, I can't simplify either of these because neither one of them has a number that will divide into both of them. But if it did end up in, like, let's say this top one was 61 hundredths, well, I gotta simplify that. I gotta find a number that will go into both of them and find the simplest form of that fraction. Okay, I think you guys are getting it. I hope you're getting it. If not, make sure you write these rules down. Like I put them up here in the top for you guys so that you could really get an understanding. But yeah, go ahead and look at those and those will be the key to you moving forward. And eventually you won't need the rules. It'll just be something that makes sense. All right, so let's complete this table. We have a picture, and the picture is a fraction. It's 2 out of 3, okay? So how do we turn that into a decimal? Okay, what is our rules for decimals? If we can't make it to 100, we simply divide. So we say 2 divided by 3, okay? How many times will 3 go into 2? It will not. Put the decimal. How many times will 3 go into 20? It goes into it 6 times. If I count by 3s, I'll get to 18. So I put 18 and I subtract. I got 2 left over. Uh-oh, this looks like it's going to be one of those repeating deals. And it does. It goes on and on and on. So 0.66, and that's going to keep repeating. Okay? And then how do we turn that into a percent? To go from a decimal percent, just run to the percent sign. So we're going to take that decimal, so it was 0.66, and we're going to go towards the hug, and we're going to say 66. Remember, it's repeating. So we're going to put that there and say 66.6%. Okay, let's try another one. We have 5 fish, and we have 3 that are colored in. This is one of those that we can go to 100, right? So we can take 3 fish, make it to 100. How many times does 5 go into 100? 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. 20 does it. So we're going to multiply the top by 20 as well, and we're going to get 60. Okay, so that is our, to get to 100, that means we're trying to find the percent. Something out of 100 is percent. So this would be 60%. Okay, and if we have a percent, how do we turn it into a decimal? We get rid of that percent sign and run that, and run away from it with a decimal 2 places. 1, 2, because we're dividing by 100. So now we have 0.60 or 0.6. And finally, one more. This one should be one of those where we don't have to do that much calculating, because we can just say, how many of those are there total? There are 10 spaces, and 5 of them are colored in. What is 5 out of 10? If I gave you 10 somethings, if there's 10 M&Ms on a table and you picked up 5 and ate them, how much of the M&Ms did you eat? Well, you ate half, right? You ate half. And so what is a half as a decimal? 0.5 or 5/10. Look at this, 5/10. And how do you write that as a percent? If you ate half of them, you ate 50%. It's all making sense, right? Coming together. I told you this is a little bit longer video, but it's super, super important. Okay, so now we can go to the next one. Which 2 answers represent this value? Okay, so we have 3 holes. 1, 2, 3. And we have, they're out of 8. Each one of them has 8 and has 8 total. Okay, so if we have 3 8s, I'm sorry, what's going on here? Pen. Okay, we have 8, and how many of them have we dealt with? We did 3 and 5 8s. That's right here. Okay, so we have to turn those into fractions and percents to see which one of these we're dealing with. But also, we have an improper fraction here to see if that will work. So let's try that first. How many holes do we have? We have 3. Each one of those holes represents what? 8 eighths, right? 8 8 plus 8 8 plus 8 8 plus 8. I'm sorry, plus 3 8, because that's our. Whoa. I'm confusing you guys, aren't I? So we have those 3 holes, our 8 8 plus 8 8 plus 8 8. And then we also have this last part that was not a hole, this part, and that was 5 eighths. So our answer is going to finish with eighths because there's still pieces are still cut into eighths, and we have 8, 8, and 8. That's 24. And then plus this 5 is 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29 eighths. Okay, 29 eighths. Do we have a 29 eighths down there? No, we do not. So that one will not work, okay? So we have 29 eighths. That does not work. So we can go ahead and mark that guy off and say he is not our guy, okay? But now we got to figure out how to turn that 3 and 5 eighths into a fraction and percent, because that'll get us where we need to go. So right off the bat, let's just use some common sense on this one, all right? Let's use some math sense, I should say. We have 3 holes. What does 1 hole equal? It's equal to 100%. What's 2 holes equal to? 300%. 2 holes is worth of 200%, and 3 holes is equal to 300%. So we know right off the bat this is going to be 300 and something percent. We just got to know what 5 eighths is, because that's going to be the part of the hole. So what's 5 divided by 8? Okay, if I have 5 divided by 8, 8 goes into 5 0 times. How many times does 8 go into 50? It goes into it 6 times. That's 48. 50 minus 8 is 2. Bring down the 0. How many times does 8 go into 20? It goes into it twice. 2 times 8 is 16. We subtract, we get a 4. Bring down the 0. And 8 goes into 45 times. So it's 0.625. Okay, 0.625. So if we had 0.625 and we have 3 holes, that means our decimal is 3.62. Okay, 3 holes and 0.62. Well, that's not an answer. Okay, they tried to trick you with 0.625 because some people will just do this. All right, well, that's not what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so it's not that one because they forgot to add the 3 holes. And how do we turn it into a percent? We move the decimal 2 places to right, and we get 362.5%. So none of those work. So I think the important part is that you really, really focus in on those little rules. How do I go from a fraction to a decimal percent? Understand those. And then go to a decimal. How do I go from a decimal to a percent and a fraction? Get those down. And then how do I go from a percent to a decimal and a fraction? All right. It's just, they'll become easy over time. It's just, it takes some time to kind of remember which one does which. And while you're thinking about that, really ponder the deeper question, which is, what do you call a bear with no teeth? Yeah, it's a gummy bear. Gummy bear, no teeth. Come on now. You got to protect yourself from the gummy bears because they will just mama. Bye-bye now.